So we are live on our first podcast for Metamorphic Site Productions. So hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Sieber. I'm the department leader of Metamorphic Site Productions, and this is Will. He's on my ministry accountability team.
Hi.
So if you are watching the video on YouTube, I'm going to post a link somewhere in the screen. You can go to SoundCloud. I believe it's under Metamorphic Site Productions, and you can download this podcast for free. All of our podcasts will be available on SoundCloud for free from now on. So do you want to go ahead and, maybe introduce ourselves? My headband just fell off. I think I'm going to have there's a headband I'm wearing that Will wanted me to wear. You're going to wear it? Perfect. But I'm going to wear the headphones so I can check the audio levels. So he's going to wear the headband. But like I said, I'm Hannah Sieber, and I am the department leader of Metamorphic Site Productions. We are under Artists and Christian Testimony. And what we do, we are a Christian production company that we make Christian films, but we also analyze film through a Christian perspective. And the podcast that we're about to talk about today is the first episode in doing the analysis and talking about film part. So take it away, Will. Let's see.
So what do the people want to know?
How are you connected to Metamorphic Site Productions?
Well, other than the fact that I'm your boo, I am kind of your accountability, and I kind of help you stay on track, and I kind of help you plan out the future and your ideas. She's the vision. I'm kind of just the bulletin board she throws things at, and we work together to piecemeal ideas and the future. So
you want to talk more into your mic?
I am sorry.
I was like, I'm listening, but you're far away.
Okay, I will scoot.
You can move your mic closer if you want.
There we go.
I have nervous laughter. But yeah, so Will is my boo, but he's also my accountability partner for my ministry. So I tell him, hey, I need to do these things. And then he's like, okay. One of the things he does, one of his job titles with Metamorphic Site Productions is that if I ever have to watch films for projects, such as making these big video essays, like I just did the Depictions of God in Film Part 1. The link will be somewhere in here. Whenever I need to make a video and I have to watch movies, he watches them with me. And what we discovered, because when we were coming up with what are we going to do for the YouTube channel for Metamorphic Site Productions, we were like, what can we do for content? And we discovered that we had a lot to say about the movies that we watched together. So how has it been watching movies with me? The movies I show you for my videos.
Well, I've always thought it was interesting how not just you and me, but anybody can see, a group of people could see a movie and everybody would come away with a different outlook on the movie together. So when you go to see a movie and, with a bunch of people, you all go see the same movie, but each of you are going to see the movie in a different way. And so being able to kind of debrief each of these movies together and seeing how she sees it, seeing how I see it, and how we kind of compare and contrast, it does open our eyes to different opinions and different ideas, but it also kind of opens our worldview to other people's worldview, but also kind of helps us define and understand our own worldview at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a big point I have with the production company, with the dream vision board of Metamorphic Site Productions, is that film is a really important part of our culture. And it definitely, especially now, helps a lot of people shape their worldview. I don't think people realize that, but we just live, especially the kids that are born now, they are coming into a world that they have so much access to everything that has come before. I mean, you can watch all the Andy Griffith Show at once, or you could, just consume all the media that has come before, and then you have everything that's new that's coming out now. And it's just, I think we don't realize that as much as we should or can, that like film and television have this great power when it comes to speaking to, you know, young minds and just people in general. Like you said, when people come and they view a film, what they take away from that film is really saying, I guess, more about them than it is the filmmakers or the film. Like
right.
the way what you take away from looking at an art is usually a reflection of yourself more than it is of the actual thing that you're viewing.
I would agree. So in case anybody does not know, I'm also a teacher. And so last year I spent a day in class showing my students the evolution of American film from the earliest to more modern. And I was trying to show them how, you know, music and art and color and cinema has evolved. And they are just so not in tune with that. They don't understand that, and they don't see how it affects them, how it affects their worldview. All they see is that it's immediate gratification, immediate entertainment, and so they didn't understand the elements I was trying to teach them about what it's showing about their world, how people see things, and how it actually affects them. So it's something that I would hope that maybe this podcast would help people understand a little bit better, that movies and cinema does affect people, but it also is a reflection of culture and our world.
Right. So the podcast is not supposed to be all serious, and I wanted the podcast to be something fun. So if you saw Depictions of God Part 1, Part 2's out, coming out soon. It's funny sometimes, but it's more very like, you know, we're going into film analysis, we're going kind of deep into heavy stuff. So I just kind of wanted this to be a fun thing, something that's easy to listen to and to laugh. And we might make it serious. We might have some big topics in the future. I feel like this would be a really great platform to do like interviews with people, if we like, you know, like other filmmakers or maybe professors of film or actors or something like that. Like it would be really cool to do that. But for today, all we're going to do is in this bowl, I have the films that Will and I have seen together or have just seen that are about depictions of God. That some of them we watched for the video, and some of them we've just like seen by ourselves. It does not include an interview with God because you have not seen that film, and does not include Darren Aronofsky's Mother. Though both those films will be discussed in the video essays. The interview with God's already been discussed in the part 1, and then Darren Aronofsky's Mother! Will be in part 2, but it's not in this bowl because Will's not seen either of those films.
I apologize to you viewers that I've failed you.
So we're just going to pick out random films I wrote down that we've seen, and we're just going to talk about them and tell you what we thought and like what was really great about this film or what was not so great or what we thought was weird and stuff like that. So I'll let Will pick the first one. Ooh. The Ten Commandments of Charlton Heston.
Fun.
DeMille, right? The C.C.
Yes, Cecil B. DeMille.
Cecil B. C.C. DeMille. Cecil.
Sure.
No, you're right. It's Cecil B. DeMille, but I said C.C. DeMille like a...
I have no clue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This one is the Charlton Heston one. So Cecil B. DeMille made one in the 1920s. That which I did not know about actually until I watched a documentary, and they had clips from it, and it said The Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille. I was like, but that's the one in the 50s. But I found out he made the same film twice. This one, we watched the one from the 50s, the famous one with Charlton Heston. So I will let you. What's the first thing that kind of pops into your head when you think about when we watch that movie?
Extremely long.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very long movie.
It's definitely one of in the category of those old classic epic films that are like 2.5, 3 hour long journeys, I would say.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I think the biggest thing we talked about when we watched that movie is how much it deviates from the biblical narrative, because we're familiar with the biblical story. Oh, I think we lost video recording. Okay, give me 1 second. Take it away, Will, while I go and fix the video recording.
But yeah, they do deviate from the biblical narrative. They add romantic elements that were not in the original story. They add more dramatic elements to, I guess, beef up the story to make it last longer. They also, I mean, this is something that she'll be able to elaborate more on, but they definitely focus on one aspect of God. They make him a very singular, one-sided depiction of God.
Yeah. Well, we're back with video recording. But yes, so basically, like, God sounds like this the whole time. He only shows up to move the plot along, really. He, like, it's very...
A literal deus ex machina.
Yes. So, yeah, there was just so much added into that was not in the Bible. They added Joshua in very early. When they introduced him, we were like, this can't be like Joshua from the Bible. He's not supposed to be born yet.
I mean, he may have been born, but he definitely wasn't like 40 years old.
He was already like a 20-something when we first see him.
Yeah, but I mean, either way, they have like a romantic subplot with Moses to build up the drama, and they really focus on God as more like the all powerful, all like just, all like, you know, strong, but they don't really focus on his love and his mercy at all. So everyone is like in sheer terror of him, but there's no fact that he also was the God that, you know, was loving and enough to come and deliver them.
Yeah. Very impersonal. Very like overlord, over, you know, like thy will be done type of depiction. Cecil B. DeMille is Jewish, I believe.
Which is very Jewish depiction of God.
He's not coming from a Christian perspective, I believe. Charlton Heston might be Christian.
He is.
So there might be a mixture here of two different perspectives. And I mean, it is still, when the epic films, I think the thing that got to me was that it was very boring at some points. And also the deviations from the biblical narrative, personally to me, were kind of like, you don't need that in there. We don't need all this extra time about Moses and, you know, the semi-Cleopatra character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do feel like there are sometimes, especially with biblical stories, or not just biblical, but like historical stories, they tend to romanticize a story. They tend to add things into a story to stretch the plot, to make it more watchable for viewers who don't care about the fact and the factual nature of a story. So they're more like, okay, we got to keep people entertained, so we're gonna cater to the people who want a romantic subplot. They want people who with like the war, like fighting subplot, and so they don't really care that they're like deviating from fact or from history. They're just trying to keep audiences entertained. I think that is where it gets dangerous when you come to historical or biblical movies or cinema, is that when a filmmaker is more wanting to pander to crowds rather than keep his story accurate, then you start losing what cinema could do, and is actually educate and teach.
Right. Okay. So we're running out of battery power real quick. So we're gonna move right along. This is number 1. So we're testing the waters here at this podcast. But
oh boy,
Space Odyssey 2001. This is in the Depictions of God Part 2. It's okay to talk about it now. That's totally fine. But we will go in depth to this film in the next part of Depictions of God video. But do you want me to take the first on this one?
Go for it, but you know what I have to say about this.
So Depictions of God, Space Odyssey does depict technically God. It depicts like it depicts like the creation of the universe, kind of, and it gives us a glimpse of this idea of like aliens, bigger life forms than us that like aid our evolution. And so it's not like God in the way that we're talking about, like the religious idea of God, more in the very much like the philosophical, like the need for like a primary mover type God, but very much in this scientific materialistic view of like, well, what if it was, you know, and there's people who believe in like the ancient aliens and stuff like that, but the Space Odyssey like depicts, I guess, the return, like all of the universe is like one soul, and then like when he at the end of the film, you're gonna take it off. When he at the end of the film he becomes like the infant. Do you remember that part where he becomes the giant infant?
Oh, trust me, I remember that part.
It's like it becomes one with the soul of the universe. A way more like oddly spiritual view of God, still impersonal, still kind of, we don't really know. It doesn't really have like a face or a name or like a character, more of like a force.
Or a box.
Well, no. Okay, so the oh gosh, what is it called? The box. What is it called?
I just call it the box.
Oh gosh, the monolith. The monolith is supposed to be like the representation, but not actually the God, but like the representation of this version of a God. How about you? You tell me what you think.
So, in case the audience doesn't know, which I know most of you guys don't, I'm a sensitive soul. I don't handle scary things very well, and I was outright terrified of the last like half hour of this film because I jumped in right after like the intermission. And so I was like, okay, I heard rumors that it's a trippy, crazy ride at the end. I was terrified. I was scared out of my socks because it's just, they don't really work through anything. They don't really talk to you about anything. The whole ship thing happens, and then he is kind of sent off into the other dimension, and he like the where they're doing the still frames of him and his reaction to the colored spectrum, and like
the famous where he goes through like time and space.
I did not like that.
That's like a famous part of that film. The way they did that, the way they filmed it.
I mean, it's really definitely a film where they're like the filmmaker wants the audience to make their own judgments about it. There's not really like
very Kubrick, yeah.
Yeah, it's not really like, hey, let's lay this out for the audience and like make them see exactly what we want them to see. But it's like, here, we're going to present you with all of this, and you're going to be left to ponder what this all means. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me?
Going off that, what do you think about where he sees himself as an old man, and then he sees himself dying? Because like that whole idea of like jumping through space and time, and like the concept of time, it's very Interstellar. Have you ever seen Interstellar?
No.
A film doesn't really talk about God, but it gets close to having to talk about God because it talks about like the beginning of time, and yeah. So that whole sequence of him watching himself age. I think I read a comment somewhere where it's like we think it's like him watching himself age, but really it's like the older version of himself watching the younger version of himself.
In the moment, it was frightening. In retrospect, I could see where it also kind of symbolic of like we need to be aware of our past, but also knowledgeable of our future, and then just cognizant of time itself.
Yeah, I think Kubrick was definitely interested in like what was out there. I mean, like reading the interviews I did for the research for the video, he had his own ideas of like creation and stuff like that, but he's definitely a filmmaker that puts layers of meaning on everything. And I could see him wanting to talk about that of like, we need to be cognizant. Oh, we're out of battery in the camera. Okay. And we're back. Whew, and we got new batteries thanks to Will. Oh, okay. So I'll just finish up talking about Space Odyssey real quick, and then we'll move on to the next one. So yeah, Space Odyssey, like I said, is definitely this this idea of like God being a necessity for life, but definitely diverts away from like the traditional view of God from a religious perspective, from like the Judeo-Christian tradition.
So you saw the first half of the movie, and I saw the second half with you. Did they mention the word God at all, or is it just kind of like left to the intelligent design, kind of bigger force out there somewhat?
So how does the film begins with like the dawn of man, and it uses the motif of the music to be like, I think I wrote down when I was like taking notes on. I wish I had my notes with me right now, but it was like order comes to chaos, kind of in the beginning. Is how I saw it. So literally, like dawn rises, and we see like primitive man, and when the monolith shows up and helps them discover tools. And then we cut to, thousands of years into the future where tools have evolved with man to create space travel. So this idea that this intelligence, so I guess it's like a big thing to talk about is that like intelligent design. So like they're like intelligence and knowledge is the most important thing in the universe of Space Odyssey, because that's how people survive. That's how everything survives and moves. So like when he becomes one with the soul of the universe at the end is how I kind of interpret what's happening. It's like he knows all. He gets to know all of what is happening. So this idea of like intelligence and knowledge and we need that to evolve. But where there's intelligence and information, there needs to be like a source. Mm-hmm. So the film comes to that conclusion of like there needs to be a source of the intelligence. There needs to be like a rhyme to the reason, or a reason to the rhyme, or whatever. And it kind of it alludes that there's like a higher, like not power, but there's a higher beings that are out there that communicate to us through things like the monolith. And so the first half of the film, they discover the monolith on some moon, and they like, it's like an archaeological dig, and they go to like view it, and it kind of leads to the events of the film, because the spaceship with Hal and Dave's the guy who turns into the baby at the end, they're supposed to be traveling to that place where the monolith is, and it ends up that Dave's the only one who makes it there, and the monolith like sucks him into like a rift in space and time, and he kind of like evolves past his physical form. So I think that's what also Kubrick talked about, was like getting past the physical realm into like pure spirit or energy, but like at the same time, where does that leave you in like talking about like materialistic things when you're going past the material? So
I know we're not really doing film theory right here, but you did research. Did Kubrick ever say that, this is like didn't really happen to him, that he was all like dreaming it, or it was like a hallucination, or was he really was Dave really experiencing in the film this? Because it could really change the meaning if it was just all like a hallucination in Dave's mind as he's traveling in space to try to figure out what this monolith is.
Yeah, so you're saying like, did he really see himself age?
So was the monolith like, when he was dreaming, or was this a dream of him? Like, what is this monolith? What could it be? And it's like his brain's interpretation is a hallucination. Is it the AI system in the computer making him feel this way, or is it him experiencing it? So
I would say Kubrick would say that he actually experienced it, that it actually happened, that it wasn't. And I guess you could argue that it's like, that it was like Dave's mind's interpretation of what was happening to him. I could see how people would say that too, but I would say that because there's a novelization that goes with it, mm-hmm. that goes more in depth of like what's actually happening, which I've not read. But I would say Kubrick could say that actually happened, that he actually did go through that space and time, and he did see those things. I don't know if they're like for sure he aged and he saw himself age, or if it's like he just experienced going through time and space, and that's like how he perceives his brain perceived it. So yeah, very interesting film. There's a lot to talk about there. I haven't watched it in months, so I'm really rusty. So I'm sorry if I didn't make any sense when I was talking about the dawn of man and everything like that. Did that answer your question? Do you want me to go more in depth of the first part of the film at all?
No, I'm good. I'll look into it.
Basically, we see that the monolith gives knowledge and power to humans, humans progress to the point where they can space travel, another monolith is found on like a moon of Mars or something like that. People are sent out to look at it. Something happens to them. This spaceship then gets sent out to go and like help those people, or to go to the site with the monolith. And then on the way there, Hal goes haywire and kills the other astronaut and all the other people that are on the ship, and Dave is able to survive.
So, I guess last question before we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Hal going haywire is like Kubrick's, I guess, kind of note on artificial intelligence versus natural intelligence? Or like the intelligence from this other being, like artificial or man-made intelligence, our attempts to try to kind of be our own gods versus this other power?
Yeah, so you thought when we first I said, oh, we're watching Space Odyssey, Will thought that Hal was the depiction of God in the film. I would say it's very close to what you said. The thing with Hal is that Hal's supposed to be perfect and not make a mistake, but he realizes that Dave and the humans make mistakes, and so he's like, oh, they have to be eliminated. I can't like trust them. They can't do this mission. So he like decides to, and their passengers are in cryogenic sleep, I guess, and he like kills them. He just like shuts off their life support or whatever. So I think it's like the idea of like maybe intelligence without emotion or heart or feeling, because like I said, the big push in this film is knowledge and intelligence and reason and being able to use all those things to like survive, and to not even survive but thrive. And so Hal is like he's like all of the intelligence, all the knowledge, but sans the humanity part. So no like mercy, no like feeling, or like, you know, even if it doesn't make sense to like help these people or save someone, like logically type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one way to think of it. And the movie stopped recording again accidentally. I will go and turn the camera back on, but our next film to talk about is The Prince of Egypt, which is one of our favorites.
Well, to be fair, when you were fixing the camera, I stuck a peek at this and saw that it was The Prince of Egypt, so I got excited. My personal view of it, just simply put, I think this is, out of all the films that I've ever seen that depict biblical stories, I feel like this one gets the closest to honoring and respecting the biblical narrative. Which is funny because, I mean, this is a big budget film with big budget actors, and it's, you know, high class. It's the first big successful film for DreamWorks, and it's phenomenal. I've seen it this year like 6 times, and I can still rewatch it again and again because it's captivating. It's beautiful. It came out in the 90s and it still looks good to this day.
Oh my gosh, yes. I loved this film when I was a kid. It's funny because when I was growing up, I would meet other kids who loved this movie, even though they weren't religious. So they'd be like, oh, I'm not religious, but like, I love Prince of Egypt. Prince of Egypt has one of my favorite soundtracks. Like, I love the soundtrack for Prince of Egypt. Hans Zimmer does the soundtrack. It's beautiful. And yeah, so I think a big so Spielberg produced this film, but he did not direct it. It had like 4 directors, but I thought he directed it, but he produced it. Mm-hmm. I think Spielberg and the people who worked on it were trying very hard not to be like the 10 Commandments, because that was like the landmark thing that came before. So they were trying to be their own thing. They completely dropped the love story idea, because it's a book. The Prince of Egypt is a book novelization based on the biblical story, I believe. And I think Charlton Heston's one takes from that book. But they went much more, like you said, much more with the biblical narrative. And it's so nice to see. It's the only thing that's kind of different is that he's not as old as he's supposed to be in the Bible. He's much older when he comes back. But yeah. Anything else you wanted to add?
As a history teacher, I really love the historical accuracy, or at least their attempt to capture the culture and the, I guess, the environment of Egypt. So, if you just pause a couple of the scenes and their work on trying to get the accuracy, and there's like the behind the scenes video of them actually going to Egypt and getting things accurate to what it would have been like and what it would have looked like. I'm sure they take some liberties. I mean, they make jokes and stuff like that wouldn't have been made during that time. But that's also, this is movies catered to children, so you cannot make it too tough and too rigid. But at the same time, I think they do more of an honor to the story than the Ten Commandments did. I think the Ten Commandments was, while it was a good effort, I think it was more trying to get to that huge epic time card rather than actually getting the story right.
Yeah, I think the thing to talk about is its depiction of God.
Yes.
Which is something that this film does, something that a lot of other films that talk about God don't do, and it shows different sides of God's character. So in the burning bush scene, it kind of goes through the book of what Moses says to God and what God says to Moses. And there's a scene where Moses says, I can't do this. I just can't. And God is angry. He's like, I'm God. I'm telling you to do it. How can you doubt me? And then right after that, he wraps, the way that it's this glowing mist, I guess, which is also a cool thing to talk about, is how they physically depict God. Because in the Ten Commandments, it's little fire. It's like things of fire come out, and then you just watch for 10 minutes it actually write the Ten Commandments on the stone, this thing of fire. But in here it's this glowing mist, and it comes up and it envelops him, and it pulls him up, and it says, Moses, I love you, I'll be with you. And it tries to show the different sides of God, that God has righteous anger because he's always right. So whenever he's angry or whenever he's stern, he's right to be so. But he's also merciful and loving, and he wants to be merciful and loving. And we see him immediately love and be kind to Moses right after that. Which I remember that sticking with me as a kid, actually, watching that scene and seeing how they show the different sides of God, what we see through what God shows us in the Bible.
Right. I still get chills seeing that scene, because it's to me, it's the most accurate depiction of God the Father in a movie, because if you also notice the color palette that changes, mm-hmm. So there's a blue and there's an orange, there's a rage, anger over what's going on in Egypt, and how Moses is kind of trying to defy God. But when Moses is cowering, he's afraid, there's a part where he says, "Oh, Moses," and the color palette turns back to a light blue, and mm-hmm. and then it envelops him. It's a very calm and tender. But the whole time, even when he's angry, there's not a deep bellowing voice like in the Ten Commandments. It's still tender. It's still it's very much like the Bible depicts God, how God understands how we can understand, and how much we can take. We can't take this angry God, but also strong and violent voice. He's tender, he's caring, and he's easing things into Moses and walking him through it.
And he says right after, I am, basically the message is I am God, what I say goes. Of course, I say, you're going to go do this, you're going to go do this, and you're going to succeed because I'm God and I already know what happens. But then he says right after that, I will be with you. And it just has that reassuring, when you go to Pharaoh, I will be with you. You stretch out your hand and do my wonders and all those things like that. And you're right. Even though God has the right to be go do what I command, he understands, the being that good father side, he's I will be with you. And I will show up for you. And he does in the film. He shows up his wonders and shows those things. What was the other thing I was going to mention?
I'm not sure what you were going to mention, but it kind of just hit me, the realization that God is not really like vocal a whole lot in the film, but after that point you kind of get you feel like he's there doing other things. Does that make sense? So he's not, he doesn't have to be direct in what he's saying, but he's definitely like indirectly in the behind the scenes, and he's there.
Oh, so guess who? Because he plays the voice of God in this movie.
You said it was Val Kilmer.
It was Val Kilmer, yeah. So Val Kilmer plays the voice of Moses and of God, which is interesting. I don't know why they did that, but
probably because they're trying to, save production costs. But if you think, I mean, I could see where they use that to like calm him, because if it was like a strange voice.
Yeah.
But if, when you're a kid, you don't notice because it's a lot softer and a lot calmer. Mm-hmm. But when you're an adult, you notice it. And I think it makes sense that he would hear a voice that's calming. Maybe, probably would not hear his own voice, but a voice that's familiar.
Right. And so did you feel like there was a unforeseen presence of God in the Ten Commandments at all? Except was God only evident in the scenes where he showed up, or was there kind of like a God's here doing things?
No,
idea?
he was only there when they needed him to show up, essentially, because it was the Moses show starring God.
Yeah.
And this way around, once God shows up in The Prince of Egypt, God is there the rest of the movie.
Yeah. Even in like the music, Hans Zimmer includes like threads of this idea, because like even in the Plague song, it has those like "Thus saith the Lord" and things like that. I love the soundtrack to this film. It's one of my favorite soundtracks.
My favorite thing is that with the soundtrack is that the first song, "Deliver Us," is in the background of every song, even the orchestrated scenes, like this plea for God to deliver us.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking and praying to God.
Yes.
There's a lot of crying out to him, and I think that's what is tendered towards like Christians and I guess people of the Jewish faith alike and things like that. It's such an intimate part of our faith, of talking to God and crying out to him and having that. And that's such an integral part of that story of like, God's like, I've heard my people's prayers. Like, I'm here to answer them now.
I still choke up when they get to the climactic part of Deliver Us, where like it raises and raises and raises and it hits that climax, and it's just like they're all like, their voices are all in unison, and it's very powerful.
We were saying, so this was the 90s, so the song, like every kid's animated movie in the 90s had to have a song, like a marketable song, and the one they chose was When You Believe, and they recorded it with Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston. And we were like, Deliver Us is totally the song of this movie. Like, don't even try to make it this song. Deliver Us should have been the song of the movie. And I think everyone kind of knows that when they watch it. But
if you've not seen the movie, just at least look up Deliver Us, and you'll get the gist of the movie within a couple seconds.
That's a beautiful song. I love Through Heaven's Eyes. Love that song, too. The Plagues is like an amazing song. And
then my boys, Martin Short and Steve Martin, knocking it out of the ballpark, because they kept it historically accurate with the gods of Egypt. And, it was a little comical, but when you watch that scene, even now, it's still creepy.
When we were talking about, like, we were watching series on YouTube, it's like things that traumatized us when we were a kid. Things that scared us. Something that really scared me was their song. They're Playing with the Big Boys Now song, which is like the villain song, and it's sung by Steve Martin and Martin Short, which I did not know as a kid. I didn't know they were playing these characters. I cannot tell that it's like Steve Martin. Steve Martin really hides his voice in this character. Martin Short, once I okay, yeah, that's Martin Short, but like Steve Martin, I was like, oh wow, he really sounds different. And I remember like laughing when I got older and found out that they sang, that was like 2/3 of the Three Amigos sang one of the songs that I was scared of as a kid. Because that part with all the shadows and the snake that eats the other snake. And it for like a young kid, it's scary.
I don't know what you're talking about. It's still scary.
It is still scary. But then you remind, like the fact that they're singing it's like, what? Like I was scared of Steve Martin, Martin Short. But yeah. It's a great film, one of our favorite. I mean, we're definitely gonna. It stopped recording again, but we're definitely gonna show it to our kids. Pick the next one. I'm going to start the camera again.
I saw, so it's Bruce and Evan Almighty. You saw Bruce. I saw Evan.
I've seen Evan.
Okay, good. I have not seen Evan all the way through. I catch it like the last 75 to 80% of the movie. I always miss the first like 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the film. But I love Steve Carell as an actor. I think he's great. I think he's a lovely, lovely person. But for a movie that is clearly marketed to everybody and is meant to kind of just take religion very relaxed, they don't take it too relaxed. I mean, there's a part where Evan comes to a group of people and tells them they need to repent. And that is, repent is not a word that you toss around in a lighthearted movie. It's a very potent religious word. You saw Bruce, and I think from what I've heard, Bruce is a very different tone than Evan Almighty. Because Evan Almighty, while it sets the Noah's Ark scene in a modern time, they do tend to respect the idea that, Noah was kind of ignored and taken for granted, and then everyone was like, oh, he's right. But yeah, I mean, I like the movie. I mean, for what it's worth, it's not, biblically accurate, but it's at least respectful of the source material.
Yeah, so Bruce Almighty, I saw when I was a little kid, and me and my parents loved it. We thought it was very funny. So I put it in here because it's a movie I'm familiar with. I haven't seen it in a very long time. I saw clips when I used for the background clips for the video. Basically, this guy is having like a really bad life, and he like cries out to God, and he's like, "Why are you just messing my life up or whatever?" And God's like, "Okay, well, how about you be me for like a day or whatever?" And so he gives him like the powers of God, and it kind of rearranges his perspective on life. And there's some things in there that are good, like some of the lines that God actually has, I like. One of them is in Evan Almighty, where everything first starts happening, and God shows up to Evan, and Evan's like, "Do I know you?" And God says, "No, but I wish you did." And like, I'm like, that's pretty good. I like stuff like that. But I think we talked about this a little bit about like depicting God as like a character, as like an actual like person. God doesn't have a body, he isn't like us. He isn't like a human. And it's very difficult to try to depict him. You can't really, it's impossible to truly depict him. Yeah. So it's just like Bruce Almighty is I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm kind of running out of things to say. I'm sorry.
No, putting God in a comical or comedic movie is always a dangerous situation for me. And I'm going to compare it to something that is going to be completely left field, but I kind of compare it to when like a political figure or president appears on like a late night talk show or Saturday Night Live, because to me it devalues the position, devalues that being, I mean, as a person, but and it kind of belittles them. It makes them kind of seem less important. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a movie, but when you depict God in a comedic movie and you make him kind of like the angle for a lot of comedic action, even if he's not the funny thing, he's making funny things happen. To me, that is not saying that the director values God in a high enough way that you would understand that. Yeah, I mean, God is the author of comedy. God is the author of humor, but there's got to be a little bit of decorum, a little bit of order and respect that comes with bringing God into a movie or a video or a song or anything like that. Because once you bring him in, just saying the word God. If you were to go walk out to a mall and say the word God in a conversation with somebody, there is a immediate change in the tone of the conversation. So when you put God in a comedy, it's a clash. There's a clash in values, a clash in perspective, and so you immediately you're equating God with comedy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think. There's a quote. So, like, both of these... Well, he doesn't get God's powers in Evan Almighty, does he?
No.
So, in Bruce Almighty, Bruce gets God's powers. So, there's a quote, I can't remember who it's by. It was like, if I had God's will, I would change everything. But if I had God's knowledge, I'd change nothing. And in Bruce Almighty... they don't really go into that. They don't really go into like the suffering of people or the problem of evil or anything like that, which is like what most people want to talk about when it comes to like God. I mean, it's really like first world problems. It's like he wakes up and he hears like everyone's like prayers like whispering into their head and stuff like that. So he makes like a giant computer to like have email sent to him that's like all the prayers, and everyone prays to win the lottery, so he says yes to everything. So everyone wins the lottery, but they get like $3 because everyone wins the lottery, so there's not enough money to go around for that stuff, and things just like devolve into chaos because he just gives everyone what they want because he doesn't want to like actually be God. And there's some like lessons he learns. The big thing with him is that he loses his girlfriend, played by Jennifer Aniston. And, the big thing about the film, I remember now, one of the rules of being God is that you can't make anyone fall in love with you, or you can't make anyone love you. And so it's an interesting conversation. He's like, how are you God without making anyone love you? And he's like, I can't really talk about like... And they don't go on the idea and the Christian idea that God is love, that God is all that's good and he is love, which people think when you say God is love, they're like, yeah, he loves you. But it's like, no, God is love. he defines goodness and love.
Do they get into the idea that like if God forces people to love him, it's not really love? Or is it?
Yes. But even when you say that, you're like, okay, well then, and I know I'm going to say it, and you're going to be like, baby, don't hurt me, but like, what is love? And they say that like, oh, if you force someone to love you, then it's not love. But then you're like, okay, well then what defines love? And then you're talking to God, and it's like, I can't remember exactly how they handle it in the film.
But probably wrong.
I can't remember. I just remember it not sticking with me. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't really talk about this film because I haven't seen it in a really, really long time. I think the thing that I got from it was that it didn't quite hit like the nail on the head, like with the idea of if you could talk to God and like get his powers, like what would really come up. It doesn't really go into like the heavy stuff at all. It's very lighthearted, like early 2000s before the recession comedy.
I mean, it makes like it's something you say in your video that you posted that it's movies tend to reflect the time period they come out in. And so if you're in the early 2000s, you're either on one side or the other. You're either on the side of like quote unquote angst and like rebellion, and you're frustrated because, you know, kind of the world's kind of crappy, and you're kind of in the teenage young 20s, or you're a 30 to 40 year old adult and you understand that, oh crap, things are crazy. And so there's a push for a lot of comedy, a lot of lighthearted. I mean, you've got TV shows that are really coming out right now that are really pushing humor because of what happened with 9/11 and terrorist attacks and all that stuff. So it makes sense that why would they make a movie about God and try to handle all these big issues? Why wouldn't you make a movie about God and make it funny but also try to teach a little lesson? I mean, avoid the hard topics if you can. I mean, a lot of shows did that at that time.
Yeah, and like I was thinking about how Martin Freeman portrays God.
Morgan Freeman.
That's the British version is Martin Freeman. Bilbo is God. Morgan Freeman. So they do a lot of like friendly advice, wink wink, like very like pastoral, like you could like get it like on a Hallmark card type of like nuggets of wisdom. And some of it is good. Some of it kind of, like I said, they give God some good lines.
That's such a weird phrase to hear. They give God some good lines.
But I don't remember it being to like the nugget of like what really matters about God. It also goes along that lines I mentioned in the video of like targeting one person and giving them like a magical experience and like reshaping them, and like this whole thing of, it's very American in that, where it's like it's just Bruce, like he gets to have this experience that involves a bunch of people's lives and it's just so he can learn a lesson about appreciating his girlfriend that he's not married to, and teaching his dog to pee on the sidewalk. It's a bit in the film. And about not having a bad attitude about his life. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that kind of irked me about it, where I'm like, it's kind of irresponsible a little bit, to use God to like just talk about those things and not be like.
So it would have been it would have probably got the same effect if like, it was like he was upset and the president gave him the power of the president for the day.
And he learned like, oh, my life isn't
as
that
hard.
Bad. Like I just needed a new perspective. Yeah. It's very much like that.
Do you want me to draw another one?
Yeah.
I think we've only got 2 left, so I'm going to grab the one that I see that I just want to kind of bite the bullet and do it now. Oh God. And no, I am not cursing.
That's the title of the movie. Talked about this movie a lot in the video, and I have seen this film recently.
I saw the film too, and John Denver is John Denver, and there's God, and then there is stuff.
Yeah, so let's start with things we liked about the film.
I like how they, if you are a fan of televangelists, then I am sorry, but the way they call out the televangelist for stealing people's money and using the name of God and using the image of God, and people who adherence to religion can be easily swayed to different sides if they're not paying attention. So people will take advantage of that, and that's been proven throughout history. So televangelists love to do that because people are easily swayed back and forth, and so they will use religion as a tool to get themselves power and money. And so it kind of calls out this one religious televangelist who's using his very powerful orator skills and his charisma to get people to follow him and give him money. And so they call him out, and they have proof that he's been a jerk to people, and I like that. I think that's good. I like the little meeting room they have with the different people of different religious faiths. I think that's really cool, like that conversation. It's kind of it. I mean, I like the scene where everybody's going to, of course, come to his door and ask questions like, oh, if you are literally talking to God, people are going to want to talk to you.
Yeah. The thing that I liked the most it stood out to me was how they went down the traditional route of like God coming to someone to like speak his word or be his messenger. So this movie isn't about John Denver's character, really. It's not like his life is in danger and we needed to like change it. He's just a grocery store manager, and he has 2 kids and a wife, and he's just a guy. And God's like, hey, speak my word to people. And he's like, what? And it's kind of biblically accurate. I mean, like, the people, God's prophets knew him much more intimately than John Denver's character does. But it's not like, oh, you need, a life makeover, so let's have this adventure where you, like, learn the special lesson from God. Like, it's definitely a message to the world. Like, it's about, like, everyone. He's just using John Denver as his platform to, like we're just talking. It's not John Denver in the film, like the guy who wrote and sang Country Roads. I don't know if he wrote Country Roads, but he's playing a character, but, like, we just know him as John Denver. But I enjoyed that because it was, like, the one part that was oddly right about it. Everything else is not right. They say things that's very highly, like, of the time. Like I go over that in the film where they talk about, I created the world, but it's up to you to make it right. It can work if you just love each other, and I don't care about what God thinks, just care about what you think. And it's very much like the 70s, like, individualism, more of like a freedom of...
Would you say it's kind of like the theory of, like, the clock that gets wound and then kind of the clockmaker where he winds the clock and he steps back and lets it wind away?
Yeah, I mean, he talked about that in the film. Like, the George Burns character, God, that's what I think is his name.
Yeah.
He literally says that, where he's like, I gave you everything, just go and do it. And so he doesn't want, like, to be God. He just kind of wants us, this film's version of God just wants to come and encourage and be like, you can do it. I love you, but I'm going to leave and get out of your hair, so you don't worry about me, type of thing. There's, like, no accountability. There's no judgment. There's no, fear, like the fear of God. It's just like, hey, I'm here. Everything's okay. You got it. Bye, type of thing.
Right. There is that line where he talks about, like, how, like, Muhammad and Jesus and Moses and all of them were all his messengers to the world.
Very inclusive. He's a very inclusive God. There's, like, no one singular truth. All is truth that leads back to him, type of thing.
Very non-conflict unless it's for comedic purposes.
Or, I mean, unless, like, the film, like, that dubs something that's wrong, and, like, what stance do they have to say anything's wrong on this if they don't have a basis of truth? But, like, the guy who's scamming people out for money, that movie dubs this to be wrong. Or it also technically dubs, like, if you think in a way that doesn't align with how this film thinks. Like, if you're like, oh, I want the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran, like, you want, Allah or something to dictate your life and tell you who you are. This film is like, maybe it should be more up to you, so it does definitely take a stance and has an idea of how the world works. But at the same time, it's claiming, like, oh, everything, all-inclusiveness. It's kind of how the world is technically now a little bit. How everyone's like, all truth is relative, everything is okay type thing.
Yeah, very peace and love in that movie. I mean, he's very much like, I love you guys. You very much like this idea of, like, patting you on the head and, like, oh, it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. I love you. Go out and be nice to each other. And there's no, like, consequences to actions. There's no... like, let's actually work together and make this right. It's like, it's very much like, love the world, love yourselves, everything is cool.
And that's, I mean, when I think of the 70s, it was very much like flower power, peace. And I guess the 60s were more like that too. But what was going on in the 70s culturally?
I mean, a lot of culture revolutions. I mean, the sexual revolution, women's revolution, just plethora of music revolution, just a revolution of like ideas and everything being more accepted and more, the war in Vietnam was ending. Everyone was kind of coming back, and everything's kind of being kind of crazy, and they didn't know if they could trust their politicians. They didn't know if they could trust, their leaders.
Right. And that's kind of like, it kind of fits when you think, and that's why I mentioned the film, like God is coming and saying, it's okay to not know what's going on and to figure it out for yourself, because that's where America is at this point. So the movie's kind of like trying to encourage, it's a very kind of left side liberal in that way, where it's trying to like, it's very encouraging to that whole movement of revolution and things changing and it not being the status quo anymore, but also like giving power to people to decide for themselves what they're going to do. I think in the video I called it, oh gosh, he's like a god of passivity.
Yeah,
like
he very much is passing the buck. He's like, he almost acts like he doesn't have the power. It's like he kind of relinquishes all his power, or he never actually had any power, and he's like, the power actually belonged to you the whole time, and you had the power to free yourselves and to help yourselves, and I'm just kind of like the motivational poster in the sky.
Yeah, and then they also go into this idea that God makes mistakes. And like, we're not saying like, baby, you're born this way mistakes. Like, he's like, avocados, I made the pit too big. Like, mistakes. Like, and they make him human in that way, which is just not it's not what Christians believe. Like, God isn't human in that way. He doesn't make error. He would cease to be God if he made error. And so it's just, do you remember that part at the very beginning? Like, can you remember what we were talking about when we were watching that? How did that, like, what was the thing that stood out to you when they were in the white room and he was talking to them in the intercom and he was telling him about?
You very much, again, depicted God as like comical, very ungodly, very human. I think I compared it to like Greek gods, in the sense that, so humans created the idea of Greek gods, and Greek gods have the abilities that humans wish they had, but it also has the characteristics and the faults of humans. So the ability to go lift mountains, but also the ability to hurt people and make mistakes. And so it's the comedy of errors, but with actual, like, God is humorous because he's making these silly mistakes, but he's also, oops, I make other mistakes, and now it's your fault and you got to fix it.
Yeah, there's later in the film, much later, he's answering questions and he talks about Adam and Eve, and he says that he didn't know like their ages. He was like, oh, when I created Adam, he was like 18 and Eve was like 16 or something like that. But I didn't know that at the time and how long humans were going to live. And that's just like, that doesn't make any sense with him being who he is. Like, of course he would know everything. If he is God, the like, the primary mover, the imago, like, oh no, we're the imago Dei, sorry. If he was, the beginning, the Alpha and the Omega, he would not know. He would not know. And it's just like, they do that, to make him more accessible, but also to fit this mold that they want of like a God that can just give philosophical permission to,
it's literally putting God in a box, and whatever attributes you want to fit in, you put in the box, and then what pops out is your God.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the courtroom scene?
Yeah, I didn't go over that in the video, so we can talk about the courtroom scene.
I think it was a little bit weird how at the very end, so like they recorded everything in the courtroom, and the stenographer wrote down everything, and then they get to like they go to the office with the judge in the judge's room, and he's talking with everybody, and they're like asking them to read, because I'm jumping ahead a little bit. God comes and acts as a witness to John Denver's character, because they bring him to court because they call him like crazy and he's causing running amok. And so they call him, they prove that, God is real because God comes and talks to them. And so they all go into this room, the judge, the prosecution, the defense, and John Denver are all in there. And of course, and God's not in there. And they're trying to read back the writing, and they're trying to listen to the tape, and it's all gone. It's all erased. It's not there. They only remember it. They have no physical proof. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it's almost kind of like a joke. That's not really helpful. It's almost like, great, now they're going to be called insane. They're going to be called crazy. And there's no, like, for somebody who, like, for a depiction of God that it has gone out of his way to pick one person to spread his message, as soon as his message is spread and God has actually come and spread his message again, it has a written form and a recorded form, he erases it?
Yeah, it kind of didn't make sense, especially since multiple religions that have claimed to talk to God, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, have written records of what they've talked to God about. Christianity claims to have met God in the flesh and has written records of like what he said. That was a weird part. I don't know if it's like calling into like faith type of thing, like just have faith, which a lot of people misunderstand the definition of faith. A lot of films and a lot of media don't depict it correctly. That was a weird part. I don't understand why he couldn't be recorded. He mentions that he's like, my voice won't be recorded on tape or something like that. Do you remember that part?
Yeah. I also remember like the person who was writing, all her writing was gone.
Yeah. I
also didn't like how he was like at the very, he's like, I'll pop up every once in a while to say hi to you. But then he's like, no, I won't. He couldn't make up his mind if he was going to pop up every once in a while to visit John Denver, if he was just not going to.
They made more.
What?
They made more of these films.
With more John Denver or no John Denver?
I think just George Burns.
I don't like this.
Oh, we have to watch them now. But yeah, I think they made like one or two more.
Is it like Oh God 2, Oh God 3, or is it like different titles?
I think it's like Oh God 2, Oh God 3, I think.
Boy.
But yeah.
Can we talk about the there was a scene where they're in a grocery store and John Denver's trying to do his job, and then God keeps appearing to him, and every time he tries to point him out, it's like he keeps changing forms to trick people instead of like being honest. So God is very deceptive at sometimes too, in my opinion. If he is trying to point out and he's changing into different people and changing different forms to trick people and to trick John Denver, make John Denver look dumb, it's very deceptive and very mocking, and it's not very godly either.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the courtroom scene.
Well, they were gonna basically say that John Denver's, crazy, and he has to pay certain fees and fines because he came in and interrupted the televangelist's work, and he defamed his character, and you have to pay fines because it costs the guy money. And then God shows up as the witness to John Denver, saying, I'll take the stand. And he's like, I swear in my own name.
Yeah, I swear on me, or whatever he says. He does a magic trick.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, he does.
I just remember the magic trick. I'm like, yes, because the proof of God is a magic trick.
Okay, let's do the last one.
Is it what I think it is? It's not the
You
one.
want me to-
It's not the one I want it to be. It's the one I think it is.
It's the Shack.
And it's a great basketball player. He played for the Lakers for a very long time. Power forward. Not great at free throws. My brother named a goldfish after him. Now he does commercials for foot powder spray.
No, it's the movie The Shack. I think it came out in like 2017. We watched this film. It did not make it into the video. We added clips of it in there, but we didn't talk about it. Oh, excuse me. It's kind of fitting this is the last one, because this is the one I think we have the most to say about. Yeah.
There was a lot of times that I was screaming at the screen saying, what, how is this possible? Why is this happening? I will start, like I like starting because I'm a teacher. You're supposed to start with the good before you get to the bad. The only good scene in the entire movie is with Wisdom. And he is having like this council meeting with Wisdom, and she is trying to like walk him through like having to choose between like
his children.
Right.
Yeah.
And, kind of waking him up to realize that, he doesn't have all the wisdom in the world.
Yeah, like that point's really great. But I think the guy who wrote the book, it's a book, a famous book that came out. I remember it was everywhere, and they made the movie out of it. The author is a universalist, I believe, so he believes that everyone will be saved at the end of time, that like there is no like those who are saved and unsaved. So like the part where he's like, oh, she's like, choose between your children, I think they're trying to say like everyone's God's child, how can God choose? It's a little bit of that like slipping in there, I think. But that scene, like the point of like you don't understand everything, and that like it's foolish of you to think that you know as much as God. Yeah, I agree. That was powerful.
But Jesus being a bro and kind of having like a very chill attitude towards everything, and also for some reason there was like this weird ink that was attacking the main protagonist in the water. I'm sorry. Even in context, even as you see the film, it doesn't make sense, because there's a scene in flowers that doesn't make sense. There's a scene with like cooking. It makes nothing makes real sense, even when it's in context. So saying it out of context doesn't help anything or hurt anything.
So do we want to talk about them depicting God in the Trinity? So this film does that. It tries to depict God in three, so the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Father is depicted by Octavia Spencer for most of the film, so technically the mother. But
then there's a surprise. They change God halfway through the film, and then into
Harry Clearwater from Twilight. Anyway, yeah. So, like after the main guy, I forget the main guy's name.
Does he have a name?
Yeah, it was like Jamie or something like that.
Jamie.
I can't. Was it Jamie? What was his name?
I think that's the name of the boy from Jingle All the Way.
He had a name that was like, it kind of sounded like a girl's name, like Ashley maybe.
Anyways, if that's a bad sign for a movie, if you cannot remember the main character's name, that's probably a bad sign.
But after he like learns the initial part of his lesson, suddenly God, the Father, appears as a man, like he's a woman, that he like takes the form of a woman from his childhood,
which is confusing.
And he's like, you just needed a mother figure in your life or whatever, and it's Octavia Spencer, and you're like, okay, fine, they're doing this, and then he wakes up one morning and it's a man. Played the same guy who played Harry Clearwater in the Twilight series. But
neither here nor there about that. It's just the fact that they're just like on and off, on and off, on and off.
There was that scene where they go into the field.
Oh,
and
no,
he's like,
no, please. The field is really creepy.
He's like, look out, and there's like the
souls,
the soul lights coming, and they're like, oh, one's walking towards you or whatever. That's like it's like a weird like video game where like your like entourage, the people are with you, are like telling you how to play the game. You're like, go talk to that one or whatever.
And it happens to be like the dad who abused him when he was a kid or whatever.
And he's like, now you understand. I'm sorry or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really weird. That and I really was weirded out by the flower scene with the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit is portrayed by a woman, and they really harp on like wholeness and like spirit, but like being one with like your spirit and like finding wholeness and sanctity and like tranquility and like and so it's less about what the Holy Spirit's supposed to do, which is like guidance and counsel and guiding you through your sin and your sanctification process, and more about like finding peace of mind and relaxing and planting flowers and so basically they all live together in this house and they're best buddies and they're all separate and they all do separate things. They're not in the same place hardly at all, and they all take him on these random journeys. And so I was really weirded out by the flower scene where the Holy Spirit and main character man decided to dig up some plants, and it's supposed to symbolically mean him digging up his past and finding like rectifying his past. And it was all physical manifestations of him supposed to be doing stuff that he needs to do in his brain.
And like I mean, and in a way, metaphor can be very powerful. I mean, a film has to show. It has to give a visual representation of something. And I think that I didn't mind that scene so much because I know that the Holy Spirit does help me rectify things from my past. And like, in the way she was talking about it, it did sound kind of like Eastern, like meditation, wholeness, centeredness type thing. But I mean, I didn't mind that scene that much.
It gave me a big uneasy feeling because yes, I agree that movies do have to show things, and so using symbolism and metaphor is good, but when you're dealing with something that is sacred, like religion, especially one that's one of the top 3 religions in the world, and you start kind of getting ambiguous with how you handle it, and you make big key topics kind of this wishy-washy, floaty, rather than as real serious as it really is, because the whole time you realize that he's not actually experiencing any of this. It's all his brain, that he's actually knocked out in the cold, about to die, and so he's having a near-death experience where he's for several days in his brain hanging out with the Trinity, which sounds cool on paper, but in actuality they're not really on the same page. It feels like they're all having 3 different kind of goals and ambitions and the way they handle things. It's the Trinity is supposed to be unified. They're supposed to be on the same page, and it feels like they're kind of all seeing things in a different perspective and coming from different perspectives.
Yeah. At one point, the guy playing Jesus, which he had a problem with. I mean, he was a Middle Eastern carpenter.
Which is nice. It was good.
He is hanging out with the main character, and he's like, I feel, the main character says, I feel more comfortable being around you. He's like, oh, it's probably because I'm human. Which, I mean, yeah, Jesus is the hypostatic union. He is fully man, fully God. But they kind of harp on that they're all different. I guess they talk about them being the same too. There's that scene where they're like making the bread or whatever, and he's like, how could you leave your son to die on the cross or whatnot? And then Octavia Spencer shows that she also has like the scar from the cross on her arm, which they got the placement of the nail correct.
Congratulations.
But so yeah, like, do you think they established that they are one in that film?
No.
Okay.
I really strongly believe that they really portrayed the idea that there is a sect of Christianity that believes that they're all 3 separate, that they're all 3 separate beings. They have separate powers and motives and movements, and I think that is really pulling in that direction. The idea that each one operates separately, they have different methods and actions, that they don't really feel like they're unified, because It wasn't like a lot of the times they were like, oh, we're all three going to help him through this. It was like, the Holy Spirit's going to take you off and go do this quest. It literally felt like
like a video game.
Like Jesus is going to take you on this quest on a boat, and then you're going to go run on the water, and you're going to get the achievement of walking on water, and then you got attacked by oil in the water.
I don't know if it was oil.
They don't really say what it is. It's just like this black sludge that attacks him. Jesus comes over, helps him, which is reminiscent of Peter. But Peter wasn't attacked by black sludge. He was just drowning. And then they go and Jesus tells him he can't. There's a part, and this still upsets me, that there's a part where Jesus leads him to this steep path, and he's like, okay, you need to go on your own. When is that in the Bible? Where it's like, peace out. I'm going to wait here. You got to do this on your own.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
that's not one of the promises.
No, yeah.
The card's full for the camera. I guess we're going to continue the rest of the podcast with just our voices in the video. Very sorry to interrupt you, Will, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, it's very disheartening when he is literally leading him to a very steep and hard path, and he abandons him. He says he's not going to go with him, that he has to go it on alone. He goes through this hard path alone, and then he has to have this really hard trial on his own. And then he comes back, he's like, okay, it's cool. Jesus was just chilled on the beach, and then they ran back on the water together.
That part is the part you like, though. It's where he goes
I don't
has
mind
the trial with the wisdom.
Yeah, I like the interaction with wisdom, but the fact that Jesus abandoned him in it there's nothing biblical about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that are not biblical about this. So the thing about this movie that they really harp on that I was talking about before was that God comes and does this radical thing to just the main character. And it could be like a near-death experience, like he was knocked out in the cabin or whatever and was dying from hypothermia. But he does get the letters in his mailbox about going to the cabin.
Which is kind of weird.
Why
does God write letters?
Also, okay, so the plot of this film is that they were camping, and the main character and his family, and a serial killer captured his young daughter, took her to a shack in the woods, and murdered her. And did they ever catch the killer?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any justice for that. He just magically finds in a dream, he finds the body and buries the body with other version of God.
Yeah, with the male version. So that's the whole he's putting her to rest. Okay. If the killer has not been found and someone puts a mysterious letter in your mailbox to go to the place where your daughter was found murdered, why would you not contact the police and say, hey, I got this weird letter telling me to go back?
But don't they say he didn't actually even pass out at the shack? He gets in a car accident.
Oh yeah, on the way there.
Yeah, so the whole shack thing doesn't happen. He has a dream. He gets into a coma when he gets in the car accident that he finished the trip to the shack. Then in his coma, has a near-death experience when he almost dies of hypothermia, and then he meets God. And so it's a coma within a coma. It's comaception.
But before all that, he gets the letter in the mailbox that tells him to go.
And then he steals a car.
Oh yeah, he steals his friend's car and wrecks it. He wrecks his friend's car. But no, if he gets this mysterious letter and he's like, it's a sign. But in reality, if someone I loved or knew was murdered and there was a letter that came to me that was go to the place where your friend or your loved one or whoever was murdered, my first thought would be oh, it's the killer doing something. it's like, I know what you did last summer vibes. Like, I would go to the police immediately and be like, this is scary. I don't know what's going on. Like, he just doesn't.
Well, he does not only steal the car, he steals the guy's shotgun, and he plans to murder the murderer, and so he commits theft, and he has
that makes more sense.
He has intent to commit murder, and
Got it.
And then he gets in a car accident because he has road rage. And then he has a coma, and then he's in a coma within a coma, and he has a meeting with God.
Okay, that makes more sense. Like, he's going to go there and kill the killer.
But then we have the classic, because he has this moment, then he can repair his whole marriage and his relationship with his daughter within minutes. He repairs his entire family unit, and he repairs his relationship with this guy that he stole from. All within. There's no ramifications. There's no consequences for the months of like neglect and emotional abuse that he put them through.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to go talk about with this film, is that they do this thing where like God shows up very personally to this one guy, and. Sorry, I'm like burping. I talk about this, like, when God does that in the Bible, when he like shows up like in a burning bush, or when he like talks directly to someone, it's not usually for them specifically, for like their personal like problems. I guess they try to get away with it with this idea of like he had a near-death experience, and like he was like close to heaven, I guess, like close to dying. You're giving me a look like, meh.
No, I'm just saying, like, the more you think about it, the more it feels weird. Like, he goes to the shack in his dream, which he only saw at night once.
Yeah.
And then he has a perfect recollection of it, but he depicts it run down and broken and decrepit. Mm-hmm. And then he throws a fit in there. He passes out from cold, wakes up.
Almost shoots Jesus. That part.
There's a lot to unpack with that one.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's taking the source material seriously. It's just giving the audience what they want. And what the audience wants in this case, they don't want a serious movie where they have to think about their relationship with God or their own faith or how they see God. They're like, God will mend my life for me, and then I'll have this, I'll wait it out. I'll wait out my problems, and then God will meet me somewhere. Or not physically. I mean, most people don't believe that's going to happen, but the God will meet me at a point, and then he'll fix everything for me, and then I'll just go back, and then everything's already fixed. It's very unrealistic because he literally wakes up from his coma, and he apologizes to his wife, his friend, and his daughter, and everything is 100% fine.
So I guess like the motivation behind wanting to heal. So what you're saying is, like, in this film, God just like shows up and fixes it, and they do talk about like how you view God. Like, there was a part where there was a part where they're having breakfast, and Octavia Spencer, who's playing God at this point, starts talking about like how he doesn't understand like judgment and wrath and like the problem of evil, and she like kind of implies that God doesn't have wrath. Do you remember that part?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
to be fair, they also mentioned the fact that evil is our fault.
Yeah. I mean, we are responsible for evil, but we're not responsible for Satan. So.
No, she didn't. No, it wasn't blaming Satan on us, but we're the makers of our own doom in a lot of cases.
Right. So like they have things that are right, and then they don't have things that are right, and that's kind of the most dangerous, actually. So
half truths are sometimes the worst truths.
Or the worst lies, really. What was I gonna say about that whole thing where her saying like, like, not really wrath. Oh, when you were saying that like God just like shows up, and they do go into the whole like, you don't, like, the way you see God isn't the whole picture. It isn't correct. Like, you need to rethink like your belief and faith in God a little bit. They go into like misunderstandings and stuff, like wisdom. They go into that a little bit. But he's just angry and upset, and he doesn't have like any push in himself to like seek out God. Now, that being said, I mean, do you think he's a believer at the beginning of the film? Do you think he's saved?
I think he's very strongly depicted as a lukewarm Christian who believes believes, and he's a Christian, but he's not. He is stagnant. He's not growing. He is not interested in growth. Something has derailed him, whether it be just the cares of life or whatever. And I think the tragedy that he undergoes with the loss of his daughter breaks him to the point where he just turns off everything, including the friend that's trying to lead him back to church. So I think he's a Christian. I think, to be fair, well, I don't think God necessarily will physically come to us. I don't think it's past God to have a quote-unquote come to Jesus moment with us if we are his children and we've gone astray. So I could see where, God will do things in our lives to try to bring us back, especially if we've gone really off the rails. So it's not illogical to say that, God could use a tragedy to lead us back to him, but to have a coma where we have like an interaction with the physical embodiment of the three person Godhead, and they're all very detailed interactions, and it's not really logical. There are movies out there that depict actual events where people have tragedies and they have encounters with God, or like they have epiphany moments where their relationship with God is kind of refurbished and re-strengthened, and those are real, and those are reality, because God will use those moments to speak to his people, and he will wake people up in different ways. But to have the way they depict it is very unrealistic and very it doesn't feel godly. It doesn't feel like it's those depictions of God don't feel very like powerful. They don't really focus on even the power of God at all. Like, God doesn't feel very powerful. He doesn't feel very like mighty, or it doesn't feel all powerful, all just or righteous. They are really focusing on the omniscience, the all-knowing of God, and the all-loving of God, and that is pretty much it. So they keep any potency to God out of it. They keep any seriousness to God out of it, and they just make it God just wants to give you a big hug and make you some cookies and call it a day. And again, I'll go back to this. Prince of Egypt really captured a lot more about God and all-encompassing of God than pretty much any of the movies we saw.
Yeah. I kind of glad that you mentioned it, because it is fair to say that God does sanctify us as part of our promise. So God showing up and sanctifying him is part of the promise of his children.
Yes.
And leading him in that. At the same time, it does take our own effort. Like, there has to be a meshing, a working together when it comes to sanctification. One time a pastor was saying, like, he was giving the example of Moses parting the Red Sea. It was like God parted the Red Sea, but Moses had to put a staff in the water. Like, God had that. Like, he had to have, like,
the faith to do that.
The faith to do it, and to, like, physically do it.
Like, even if a person was at their, like, bottom, rock bottom, they are, like in a deep depression or drug addiction or something like that, and they are one of his children, even if God has to do 99% of it, the part that makes it a teamwork is they still have to decide to accept whatever God's doing. So it may be God brings somebody into their life that will shake them up, but they still have to take the steps. Because like I was told when I was in high school, God is a gentleman. He's never going to force himself on us. He's never going to make us do something. He will help us, and he will take large steps to help us. There's also the old adage that instead of having to feel like we have to walk back to God, all we have to do is turn around. He's right there. But it's not really a work as much as he's already given us the faith and the means to do it. We just have to choose to do it. But, the way they did is he barely had to do anything. Like, it was all, silver plattered to him. And then he wakes up, says he's sorry, and then everybody accepts him. He's loved again, and there's no ramifications, and he never really runs into God again. Everything goes back to happy. But there's still no... And it's not realistic. It's not grounded in reality. It's kind of this ethereal, made-up world where, like, God has no power and he's not strong, but he is a ball of love, and he's all, buddy-buddy, and he wants to just be your best friend rather than your God and your Lord and your Savior.
So it goes back to like this idea of like the universalism where like everyone will be saved and that God doesn't have wrath and things like that, and that what God's mainly concerned about is like you being okay and you being happy. He is concerned about that. That is a part of the plan. But the way this film presents it, it's like that's like the end game. The end game is for the new heaven and new earth to come, and for Christ, for God to reign. And that's when we'll truly be happy. Like that's when we'll finally be fulfilled. Everything will be put to rest that needs to be put to rest. I think if someone were to watch this film and they were not a seasoned believer, they would walk away with this idea. They would walk away with a very small picture of God, with a very like this idea that God is not as big or as powerful or just as wondrous as this film depicts him to be.
There is a huge part of our society that, while they believe in God, they kind of believe God is unable to do anything. That yes, God is love, and that God is peace, but that is as far as God will go, and that everything is left up to us. And so I believe, while people don't understand the idea of like the deistic God, of God just kind of existing, and yeah, he has nice, warm, fuzzy feelings towards us, I think there are a lot more people who believe that. So if you were to go out to a mall and poll people who believes in just God, not a specific God, most of the people would say that they believe there's a God. But those people would probably believe that there's God loves them. He's a cool, and he's friendly. He's happy, and he wants us to be happy. But there's no other side to that. There's no God with a power to do anything, or that there's justice for our mistakes or our sins.
I got it. The weight of sin. This film doesn't go over sin.
No.
And it doesn't go over the gospel.
I mean, they show his wrists. That's it.
I was trying to think, like, what is the thing that's missing here? That, like, I'm like, there's something here that, like, if I were to make this film, I would feel like responsible for not depicting, or for showing a misunderstanding of that. I'd be like, this, I wouldn't want me to depict God this way. And it's there is no mention of the weight of sin or how sin affects God.
I mean, to be fair, in Oh God, they completely go to the opposite. And they say that judgment doesn't exist.
Yeah, so why did Jesus die?
Right.
So but they go over Jesus dying, but they don't go over, like, why.
Both movies do that.
Yeah, they don't go over why sin is so important and why it's an issue. And they don't go over the weight of it, like how much our sin cost. They don't go over the gospel message of that Christ took all of us, all of our sin, to give us his position and to give us freedom. This does not talk about that at all, or just, and I think that's it. I think that's like the weight of sin, and like, yeah.
I mean, if you take sin out of any equation when you talk about religion, it takes away any reason to turn to it. I mean, the whole reason people turn to religion is to find answers to a broken world.
Yeah.
And so some religions will give you warm, fuzzy feelings and tell you that everything's okay, everything's cool. Some will say you must like pay back your mistakes, and you have to, and each of these little niches will like fit in with like this seeking that we have. And so a movie that like Oh God or The Shack fits in with our desire to feel a certain way, to feel accepted and loved, and I don't have to worry about anything. There's no consequence, in the sense that I don't have any weight on my shoulders. I don't have any guilt to carry anymore.
Yeah,
but
like Pilgrim's Progress, the burden of the backpack is not there.
Right. And then the flip of that, there are some religions who give you the burden and then leave you with the burden. And there's the movies that depict that, where it's like it's all your fault. Everything, you know, the world messed up. The world is all your fault, and we have to fight it. We have to fix it. And so when you have the wrong depiction of sin, either non-existent or overly existent, it's still wrong. And so people go to religion to seek the answer for the brokenness of the world.
And but also, like, if you don't have the wrong depiction of sin, you're automatically have the wrong depiction of Jesus, because the reason why God took a human form, the gospel message, so that we could be free from sin. So, like, they mention in this film in Shack that he dies on the cross, but that just ends there. They don't talk about.
It's kind of like a wink and a nod more than like, hey, let's actually, discuss the fact that this is important.
Yeah. I guess we can end the podcast now. We went much longer than we thought we were going to. But is there anything you want to say before we end?
I look forward to being on the next podcast, hopefully.
Hopefully. So thank you for listening. And this is the Metamorphic Site Productions podcast. We want a cool jingle and maybe a name for it. We're trying to figure out what we're going to call it. And you can find this for free on download on our SoundCloud. I think it's soundcloud.com/Metamorphic Site Productions. I think. If it's not, I'll get that right in the next one. But if you're watching this on YouTube, the link will be in the description below. And yeah, thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.